Alright YouTube, right now on C-SPAN there's live video, which obviously I have paused to make this video of John Kerry and his administration friends talking to the Senate, trying to basically gull them into supporting action in Syria. And Obama says he's confident that action will be okayed by Congress. I think that if he looked at it more reasonably, he'd be a little bit more skeptical of that. I'd say about 50-50 chance. It all depends on people like Rand Paul, Amash, who are all reasonably good speakers, winning over people, and then, of course, John Kerry and his allies on the other side lying to Congress in order to get more votes. Which is clearly the case. And if you listen to what's being said, and I'm sure somebody will post this on YouTube later when it's done, you can hear the lies. You can hear the half-truths, the lies, and you can tell by some of their unwillingness to answer certain questions that there's a little bit going on behind the scenes. For instance, Kerry saying, oh, well, Assad is supporting Al-Qaeda. That's actually not true. Al-Qaeda backs the FSA, which are the ones that are actually fighting against Assad. It wouldn't really make sense for him to then support Al-Qaeda as well. It is true, though, that he supports Hezbollah, which is another different group which has ideological differences to the FSA and Al-Qaeda. They're flip sides of the same coin. But we've been arming the FSA, which is backed by Al-Qaeda, and you don't hear anyone in the Senate saying, well, why are we funding terrorist groups, which is a question they really should be asking. You've also got protesters at this meeting currently that are saying no more war and things like that. It seems almost like they were planted there, though, because you take some of these crazy screeching people in pink shirts and put them in the crowd to raise hell, and it makes all protesters look like they're a bunch of tinfoil hatters, which is a common tactic, and I'm sure that's probably why those particular people were chosen to be there in the first place. But right now, the public has gone from extremely against any military intervention in Syria a few weeks ago to marginally more receptive of it in the current time frame. And currently you're seeing me in a darker color because the sun went behind a cloud, so I apologize. This shows the simple-mindedness of a large number of people in the public, because they get their truth from the media. And unfortunately, the media right now is playing softball with the Kerrys and Obamas of the world. So the left is playing softball because they happen to be Democrats. The right-wing media, with a few exceptions, is also on board with this, though, because there are a lot of people like McCain and Graham and others who are on Obama's side here, people who are war hawks. McCain is the most hawkish individual currently in the Senate, and has been for some time, and he's a Republican. Of course, Obama's a Democrat, so having McCain on his side can't do any harm. It's strange almost to see the sort of coalition of the willing forming around the idea that somehow magically if we drop a few missiles on Syria and that nothing will happen. And if it does happen, if you listen to what Kerry said, he wasn't really willing to say that there wouldn't be any boots on the ground. He wasn't, and he's spitting out buzzwords like boots on the ground left and right. He never actually admitted or said or stated in any literal fashion that there's no way in which we would put people in Syria, actually have soldiers in Syria. That indicates to me, because it's similar to the rhetoric used in Iraq, that they are planning to put soldiers in Syria. They may not be willing to say it now. Right now, we're at the level of, oh, well, just let us carry out a few strikes. That'll be all. Anyone who believes that Assad and Iran and Hezbollah and all of these other groups aren't going to retaliate either against our ships, our aircraft, firing on the missiles as they streak through the sky, or against our allies in the region, or our fair-weathered friends, I should say, because most of the Arab League and Israel are more fair-weathered friends, that as long as we do what they want us to do, they're our allies, otherwise they sort of go it alone. Anyone who believes that Assad and these groups won't retaliate is fooling themselves. Of course they're going to. Assad is a marginally legitimate leader in Syria, who right now is being opposed largely by groups we used to call terrorists, largely from outside of the country of Syria. They're from Lebanon, they're from Libya, they're from Egypt and Turkey. The Turks have been giving aid to these groups, allowing to cross the porous border freely. It wasn't too long ago that we called this sort of warfare tactic, what the FSA uses, a form of terrorism. The only difference is we don't particularly like the Assad regime because he doesn't play games with us. He plays games with us and isn't willing to greenlight all of our activities in the region and actually calls the United States government out when it spouts bullshit about his regime. And so we decided to arm Al-Qaeda in Syria. And the public is slowly coming around to supporting this act, which is a terrible idea. There should be no support for this action. It's too expensive. Let's face it, it will escalate. That's my prediction. My prediction is this. My prediction is that the Senate will thinly, by a very thin margin, okay these strikes. Obama will start firing missiles into Syria. The Syrians will attack Israel, Hezbollah will attack Israel, Iran will start arming and sending men, and it will turn into a regional conflict. And then when it turns into a regional conflict, Obama will turn around and say, well, we have to put troops on the ground because we're getting attacked. Assad has gone rogue. He's going to use sarin against, he'll magically smuggle sarin into New York City or some crazy shit like that. And he'll say, well, now we need troops on the ground. And everyone will be like, oh, they attacked an aircraft carrier. They shot down some of our planes. They fired missiles at Israel. Oh, my God. Spread the alarm. We must act now. And then suddenly we'll have a few 100,000 troops over there with more, carriers and things of that nature. And we'll be flying sorties and we'll be bombing schools and mosques like we did in Iraq, firing depleted uranium, using all the standard munitions. We'll have white phosphorus flying through the air and we'll be burning people alive. And then it'll turn into a long, bloody, drawn-out conflict, which only a handful of industrial companies will actually benefit from. And it will look good on Obama's resume. He can say mission accomplished like Bush did and use it for good PR. And after he leaves, whoever gets elected next can deal with the fallout from having been there so long. That's sort of the way we've been operated. It's the way we operate in Afghanistan. It's the way we operated in Iraq. It's the way we operated in Korea. It's the way we operated in Vietnam. It's the way we operated in all of these countries, and except for a handful of situations in the last 60 or 70 years, where we've gone into a largely undeveloped nation where the only resistance we encountered was a very scattered group. With those few exceptions, like Somalia, we've largely had this same problem with all of the struggles that we've gotten into. The only redeeming facet of Syria over Iraq is that Obama's actually bothering to play the charade of going through Congress, which is a charade, because you know that people like McCain will pressure the Republicans to vote for it, and people like John Kerry will pressure the Democrats to do the same. What they should do is say fuck off, and they should say no strikes. The biggest lie, though, is America, it needs to be made clear that America will follow through on its promises, so as Kerry says. Obama, we drew a red line in Syria, and now we've got to act. The problem being Obama is not the United States. He's simply the president, the largely unappreciated president who has dwindling levels of actual support, whose own ideas are almost antithetical to the ideas of the founding of the country. The problem being now people like Kerry are pitching it to the Senate as though the United States spoke with a unified voice, which is clearly not true. Most of the public still does not want this to happen. I think there's a fairly large minority, if not a slight majority of people in the Senate and the House of Representatives who don't want this going through. This isn't some unified battle cry like after 9/11 we were all wanted to feast on people's blood, so we almost unanimously supported Afghanistan, even though it was a terrible idea and it should have been, and the handful of people who called it out as a bad idea were later remembered as almost prophetic, even though at the time they were spit upon and cursed as anti-patriotic. The idea that Syria is a threat to the United States is ridiculous. They are not. They have a very underdeveloped navy. They have a decent air force, but I mean, they can't attack us with it. They're not a state sponsor of terrorism unless you count Hezbollah. The idea that they're supporting Al-Qaeda is ludicrous. It's a relatively small, not very powerful nation. The only reason it has some level of power in the region is due to the fact that it gets Soviet backing, and later, of course, Russian backing, and the fact that it has some measure of oil, and the fact that it's partnered with Iran, which is a much larger, more developed, and more populous nation than Syria will ever be. Syria is not a threat to us. It's only a threat to our allies once we started saying we were going to attack them. Assad showed absolutely no proclivity towards threatening any of our allies other than the Turks, who had in turn attacked him, and that basically settled down on its own because Assad didn't want to fight a war on two fronts. The only reason that supposedly there are Scud missiles aimed at Israel right now is because we sounded the war cry. The United States did, not even we. It wasn't the people. The people aren't calling for war. The Congress hasn't called for war yet, although some of the warmongers in Congress have. The only one supporting war right now is Obama and a handful of his allies. The British backed out, which was the right thing to do. Their House of Commons showed great restraint in doing so. And the public is being slowly brainwashed into thinking that Assad supports Al-Qaeda and is a state sponsor of terrorism, which he's not. He's a marginally secular dictator. He attacks Al-Qaeda because Al-Qaeda is attacking him in his country. Doesn't matter what you think of Assad, whether you think he's a brutal despot or not. It means absolutely nothing. We're screwing around again like we did in Iraq under the same pretenses. Well, weapons of mass destruction being used against people, despotic dictator, we've got to get rid of him. And the same people, the Obamas and the Kerrys who were against Iraq and who later campaigned, one successfully, one unsuccessfully, on the platform of peace, are now turning around and asking for war. Because I will tell you, if we attack Syria with cruise missiles, they will retaliate, because it would be insane for them not to. They'll either retaliate directly and fire things at our ships. Assad does have some frigates. They wouldn't last long, but they could probably fire off a few volleys before they got sunk. They do have the ability to hit our ships by plane. He'll either attack our ships and other assets in the region, maybe target our bases in the region, or he'll attack Israel, or he'll attack Turkey, or some combination thereof. And this is what Obama and Kerry want. This is what they want. What they want is basically bomb Assad until he attacks back so that they can put boots on the ground. It's the same thing we did in Iraq. It would have been all well and good if we had just flown over and unleashed massive chaos and havoc in the streets by bombing them, and we had already crippled their forces, and once we got the word Saddam was dead, we probably wouldn't have had boots on the ground if it weren't for groups like Halliburton amassing hundreds of millions of dollars in profits by sending mercenaries and pumping out tanks and weapons as fast as they can. This is just a bid for money and to destabilize the region to prevent a pipeline from being built that would bypass the Suez Canal and the Israeli pipeline. That's all this is about. The fact that the public doesn't understand this shows their simple-mindedness largely. And there were people quite some time ago who said when Syria started going after Turkey and started doing things of that nature that we should have attacked then. My question is, why now? When we know gas was supposedly used before, he's attacked our allies before, he did either inadvertently or purposefully attack Turkey and shoot down at least one of their planes and bomb their border with artillery, and we did nothing. And Hezbollah has been firing things at Israel for years and years and years, and we've done very, very little about it. But suddenly this is an international issue, and there's moral outrage, and think of the children. and John Kerry just sits there lying through his teeth. One has to wonder if he even believes that we should be over there and that he's not just doing whatever Obama and other shadowy figures are telling him to do, because clearly in 2004 he was dead set against all forms of war and was almost an isolationist. Or if the changing of the party has something to do with it. It was wrong for the Republicans, but now it's right for the Democrats. It's just complete insanity. We should just leave the area alone and let them deal with it themselves. They're not going to attack us unless we put things in the area for them to attack in the first place. And Assad really has no capability of going after Israel. Unless Iran gets involved, then in that case, I think that it would escalate into a significant conflict, and no nation of any means would be able to back out of it anyway. So if that happens, yeah, there will be war. Until that happens, there's really no reason for us to be over there. There's really no reason that we should be doing anything. I hate to say it, but the use of chemical weapons, it can bypass all sorts of international, this is the other new buzzword, norms. It conflicts with the international norm that you're not supposed to use them. They won't go so far as to say international law, because there's really no law binding a nation to not use them, because we backed Saddam while he was using chemicals against the Iranians back in the 80s, and there are still enough people who remember that to make it inconvenient to say it's against international law. But if Assad were on our side, we'd be saying the FSA were terrible, dirty terrorists, even if he was still a despot. If he did what we wanted him to do, we'd say, yeah, use the chemical gas. Here, we'll even give you logistics support, just like we did with Saddam. It's all just a big game to them. They make money off it, frankly, and where there's money to be made, lives will be lost. And they don't care if it's our young men and women whose lives are lost, as long as they keep above their profit margin. As long as their profit margin keeps increasing, they're happy. Anyone in the Congress who votes for this ought to be voted out as quickly as possible. If not simply taken out of office, just say, we're going to have a recall, get rid of all the warmongers. We can't afford it. And it's going to tarnish our image. It's going to reheat the Cold War worse than it already is being reheated and has since Bush left office. Literally, it could escalate into a World War III situation. I think that that's less likely, but you got to remember, we almost got into nuclear apocalypse mode back when JFK was president with the Cuban Missile Crisis. I think most reasonable people, Democrats included, will agree JFK and his administration were marginally less inept and more intelligent than the Obama administration, and marginally more honest as well. It would totally suck if all the nukes were to fly tomorrow. And people, again, are totally ignoring Fukushima, which could be just as bad a situation and is escalating in nature at the current moment, but people are largely ignoring that because they'd rather see shiny things fly through the air and devour their targets because they like to watch explosions because they're a bunch of idiots. And that's unfortunately a large segment of the American population. They're sitting there naked and whacking off when footage of Iraq was on TV. Imagine how much more exciting now that we've got all sorts of live streams and independent bloggers out their apartment window in Damascus can just point their camera at all the carnage outside, bodies bloating and blowing up, tanks exploding, cruise missiles firing into military bases. It'll be great for the warmongers. John McCain, I'm sure, has beat off recently thinking about war in Syria. The thought of war actually excites this man. He's been a continual thorn in the side of those calling for peace for decades. He's a complete chicken hawk, too, because even though he's supposedly this glorious, decorated war hero, this veteran, and he was kept over there in the camps in God knows wherever, but I can't even raise my arms above here because they kept breaking my arms and all these things. Well, you'd think that somebody who was tortured and kept in a prison camp would be against war because he's seen firsthand what it can do. Instead, he seems to get a stiffy off of it, like he's some sort of goofy masochist. John McCain's fucked up. John Kerry's a complete hypocrite. Obama has no clue what he's doing. put his foot in his mouth and is now trying to recover lost ground and I guess hope that he can bomb Syria without retaliation, which is a complete nutty scenario that's never actually going to happen. And I think the powers that be, Obama not included in that mix, know that they will retaliate and thus give us a reason to make billions of dollars for industry by putting boots on the ground. That's about all. Peace out.